C3, it's a little over 2,000 people. Currently, it's about 4 times that, about 4,000 or so. 8,000, I should say. And that's including some of the outlying areas. I mean, the central downtown area in those regions is around 4,000 plus.
Yeah.
But about 8,000 is the census. So there's been some obvious growth. The south edge of town, we just met, a lot of modern day buildings and restaurants, motels, those sorts of things. East of town, there's a lot of that. But again, it's to be expected because this is a rather busy place. In the summer alone, we can expect more than 1 million visitors here. And every year we draw between 1.7 and 1.8 million. So I mean, it stays fairly busy for 9 of the 12 months. Park is open all year round, but I'll be honest, it's pretty quiet here in the winter. November is sort of our last gasp of sorts. We've got some pretty heavy visitation yet up to the third weekend in November. And that's when, that final weekend is when we, honor President Lincoln having come, obviously, in November of 1863, the Gettysburg Address. There's a parade and some special observances. And then after that, it gets really quite quiet for the winter. You can see some of the museum complex to your left. I call it the new museum complex. It opened up actually in April of 2008, so it has been around for 4 years already. But when we came through that parking lot a short while ago, that's where some of the old museum complex actually would have been many years ago. And this one, well, again, the visitation's been strong. Typically on the weekends, even this time of year, these parking lots are all filled. Matter of fact, we're going to be cutting through the bus parking lot area here in just a moment. So I'm going to hang it right here. We get very busy in April and May with a lot of the school groups. More so then than we do in the fall. And we'll have some of those Fridays in May, especially. We'll get 75 to 100 buses here. So, this parking lot is filled with buses. They're coming and going and dropping off students, picking them up. Some of them are spending time at the museum. And we actually had some Wednesdays even where we topped 135 buses here. So this past spring was very busy again. Charter groups such as yours that are coming in from, neighboring states or even from, quite a ways away. And then, of course, a lot of the school groups, local school groups that come in. You'll see the yellow school buses here as well. We call those the yellow hounds. Hang right here. They're not always the easiest to do, especially when you have the warm weather. They're usually not equipped with air conditioning. And, of course, and the windows are down, so you got all that engine noise and, of course, the heat to contend with. So it's nice to have a coach. So hang right by the traffic. So, knowing the park is 6,000 plus acres, but that the battlefield really encompassed more than 30,000. In truth, we never leave the battlefield. So, you're going to see modern day buildings such as we have right out here now across the road that are basically on the battlefield. The park someday will acquire some of these properties. As a matter of fact, there was a home, as we're turning to the immediate left, that was just taken out. And they've acquired about half of the buildings that are here. So eventually I think they want to remove all of these because they're non-historic. The one coming up on the right is from the time frame of the Civil War. So that one obviously will be maintained and of course it's owned privately. So we're going to take a left turn here right where this home is. We can actually get over. Usually they're identified. A lot of these were hospital sites during the battle. Now we've had two things affect the battlefield in a kind of negative way over the course of time. The fact that the community is bigger, obviously we have lost some land to development. But the good news is the park-held land does surround a lot of the community, so it can't grow much from the inside out. We say it encapsulates it. And the more serious problem, probably of the two things, would be the fact that we have a lot more trees on the battlefield today than we did in 1863. And we call that encroachment, where the tree lines have expanded outwardly. They've gobbled up a lot of the open pasture land areas. And that has made at times interpreting the battle difficult because you can't see it the way it really was. The park is trying to fix that. They started a project about 10 years ago where their long-range goal is to remove about 600 acres of trees and to open up the view. To your left is a good example, all open field now. That was solid woods just a few years ago. So clearly they're trying to reclaim some of these areas and bring back more of what we call that 1863 vista, let people see it like it was. This was wooded back then, don't get me wrong. We're at Culps Hill right now, at the base. We got to work our way up toward the summit here. It was wooded and even heavily wooded in some areas, but as you look left and right here, you're going to see a lot of dead trees in there, stuff that's come down on its own over the course of time. Back then, farmers are dragging that stuff out for firewood. They're chopping it up and burning it, putting it to good use, something that we're not necessarily doing today. One tight turn. They're pulling out some of the healthier trees for the timber that's needed for their fence lines, for their homes, and that sort of a thing. And of course, animals would be grazing in some of these lower areas and munching down some of this lower growth. So it would have made it a bit more open than what we see. Sometimes you have to use your imagination a little bit. You made it look easy, man. You just kind of glided right through there. He's an old seasoned hand. Yeah, when they put these avenues in many, many years ago, they didn't take into account the buses that we'd be having today. These coaches that can handle 50, 60 or more people. This area to your left still looks kind of alien to me because I started here in 1980, and for 30 years that was solid tree line. They just opened that up within the last couple of years. The meadow to the right, that's been maintained for quite some time. The Spangler family lived here at the time of the battle, and that's why you'll see the name up here, Spangler Spring. But there were a couple of families here by the name of Culp that also owned property, and that's why it has the name Culps Hill. When we can bear left, it's a little easier grade going up. What I'm basically going to point out when we climb the tower is what was called the so-called fishhook line of the Union Army. Now, I don't know if you guys have studied much about the battle or if you've seen a few visuals, but if you think of a fishhook or an upside down letter J or a candy cane, whatever kind of works for you visually. The point being, where we are right now, this is where the imaginary point of the fishhook begins to take shape, in that the Union troops on day one that will be fighting west and north of town, they're going to lose the first day of the battle. They fall back through the streets of Gettysburg, and this is where they regroup, on this high ground of this hill and Cemetery Hill. And more Union troops come in here to help fortify this, so that by the beginning of the second day, the end of the first day, beginning of the second, there's a new Union battle line that many said resembled this imaginary fishhook. We'll point to the hook at the bottom of the hill, curves up to the top of the hill where that tower is that we can climb. Then it works over towards Cemetery Hill, which is kind of in front of you and to your left a bit. It creates like a U or a horseshoe shape. And then it trails way off to your left, about 2.5 miles to an area known as the Round Tops. The point being, it's good high ground. The Union Army is dug in. They're a lot better off where they are here than they were on day one. You'll see that as an interesting contrast. Elevation here, rocky terrain, some trees. It's not all open ground like you're going to see west of town when we make our next stop and I get you off the bus. So clearly these Union troops have a bit of an edge now when they're in here. And the monuments sort of attest to that. You're going to start seeing loads of them. And I think if you wanted to add up everything that we've got, regimental monuments for different units that fought here, a lot of guys from Michigan that were involved in the fighting. As a matter of fact, some that were specific to the Detroit area, Wayne County, regions just north of there. They're heavily involved. We've got about 2,000 monuments, markers, informational plaque, cannon, specialized statues to generals and others, state memorials. They're everywhere. Clearly indicating where the men fought, where they suffered sometimes their heaviest losses. The little stones that you see, they kind of look like little gravestones. Those are called flank markers, and they actually go as a set. Usually there will be one on either side of one of these larger regimental monuments to give you a little better definition of space, where the left end of the unit was, where the right end was. Most of these regiments in 1863, the war's in its third year already, are only about 300 or 400 men. They're way down in their numbers. At the beginning of the war in 1861, a regiment was 1,000 soldiers. So they'd already lost about 2/3 of their men. Men had been killed or wounded. Perhaps they'd been captured. So they were a mere shadow of their former self. Now, if you're not a climber, you don't have to go up. What you're going to see is Gettysburg, which is off to your left, and we're driving right through the town when we leave here anyway. Cemetery Hill is right behind you. We're going up and over Cemetery Hill when we leave here, and then the Round Tops are off to the right. So, if you're not able to go up or whatever, don't worry about it. You're still going to see these things up close anyway. But it's a nice day for getting up there. Bring your cameras. You get a couple of good photographs, I'm sure. And then I'll point out that fishhook line and give you a little orientation to where we met, where we are now, where we're headed next, that sort of a thing. So who's going up? Don't all raise your hands at once, all right.